Welcome to the Mrs. Beastly channel.
Blood Moon Chronicles.
Chapter 22.
So here we were, again. Or maybe it was the third time this week, depending on how you counted it. Counting by hours, counting by heartbeats, or counting by how many times I checked under the bed that day just to make sure nothing had crawled back in and taken a nap with me. We were in the old boiler room of the abandoned textile mill, which was ironic, considering the only thing heating this particular hellscape was panic. The air smelled like ozone, old rust, and something distinctly wet, like meat left on a counter too long under a heat lamp. It clung to the back of my throat. I tried to swallow it down, but saliva's a lot thinner than you want it to be when you're trying not to throw up over a guy who was currently being eaten by his own belt buckle. "You think it can hear us breathing?" Mike whispered. He was leaning against the rusted pipes, hands in his pockets like we were at a casual get-together and not hiding from whatever the hell had taken Dave out back there. "It's always listening," I said, my voice coming out dry as chalk dust. I cleared my throat. "Mike, shut up. But it helps to have a plan."
"I don't need a plan, Mike. I need a nap, but we're not doing the napping part yet."
I looked back down the corridor. It was just a long stretch of peeling paint and flickering fluorescence, but my skin knew what was waiting around that corner even if my brain refused to acknowledge it. You'd think after 21 chapters, or years, or days spent in some kind of purgatorial limbo, I would have built up a tolerance. Instead, I still flinched when the wind blew through broken windows. "Hey," Mike said again, softer this time. "You don't think we're the problem, do you? Like, maybe we're the anomaly?" I turned to look at him properly. The fluorescent light overhead buzzed like an angry hornet trapped in a jar, casting deep shadows under his eyes. He looked exhausted. They all did. We were running on fumes and coffee that had gone cold hours ago, but we kept moving because stopping was the same thing as dying. "Stop overthinking it," I said. "Dave didn't make it through chapter 20 for us to stop now." "That's not what I meant," he muttered. He shifted his weight, and the leather of his jacket creaked, a sharp, loud sound that made me flinch. "Keep your voice down. I'm trying," he hissed. "Do you know how hard it is to have a meaningful conversation with a man-eating nightmare while I'm also dealing with whatever that was?" He gestured vaguely at the ceiling, or maybe the sky. It's hard to tell in this place where reality seemed to be held together by duct tape and spite. I didn't answer right away. I watched his eyes dart around the room, checking every shadow, every reflective surface, as if that would somehow make us invisible. It was cute, really. The way humans clung to their logic like it was a life raft in a hurricane. "You know," I said finally, "if we survive this, you're buying me a drink. A strong one. Deal." He paused. "What if we die?" "Then don't buy me anything." I moved past him toward the door at the end of the hall. It was a heavy steel slab, slightly warped from water damage. I could hear it on the other side. The wet slap of something against tile, followed by the scuffing of claws that sounded suspiciously like they were trying to mimic footsteps. "Wait," Mike hissed, grabbing my sleeve. "What if it's a trap?" "It already is." I turned the handle, locked from the outside. Of course it was. Nothing in this world, and I use that word loosely, was going to make things easy for me today. I closed my eyes and thought back to what Dave used to say. He'd always been the one with the plans, even when he didn't have any money or a plan B. "If they can hear you," he used to say, "they win." I knocked on the door 3 times, hard, once for each of us, or maybe it was just habit at this point. "Hey," I yelled, keeping my voice level. "We know what you are. We're looking for a friend of yours. Big guy? Tall? Smelled like burnt hair and bad decisions?" Silence. Then the sound of something dragging across the floor on the other side of the door. A low hiss, not an animal noise. Something worse. like static coming out of a dead radio channel, but with intent. "You're not him," it said. The voice was everywhere at once, vibrating through my ribs, rattling my teeth. It sounded like me, only older, harder. "You don't belong here. Nobody belongs here until they have to." I turned back to Mike. He was pale as a sheet of printer paper. I wanted to tell him to relax, but we were in a world where gravity was more of a suggestion than a law, so that didn't seem like the most helpful thing to say right now. "Mike," I said, "yeah, if we make it out of here, you're going to have to learn how to swim." "What does that mean? Why swimming?" "Because if you don't know, I'm not telling you." I stepped back and reached into my pocket. My hand closed around the handle of a heavy iron wrench. It was cold, slick with condensation, but it grounded me. "Hey!" I shouted again, louder this time. "We're still here, and we brought snacks." "Shut up," Mike hissed, clutching his head. "You're going to make them come in." "They already are." I pressed my back against the cold wall next to the door and waited. It was a gamble, sure, but sometimes you had to trust your instincts even when they were screaming at you to run or fight or do literally anything else. "Hey, if you want us dead, just say it." The lights flickered out. For a second there was nothing but absolute blackness. No sound, no smell of wet fur and ozone, just the hum of the fluorescent light dying out slowly like it had given up on life too. Then, something thudded against the other side of the door with a sickening crack that sounded suspiciously like a rib breaking. "Okay," I whispered. "That's new." "Is that supposed to be funny?" Mike hissed, though he didn't move from where he was crouched by my side. His breathing was shallow, rapid little gasps that did nothing for the situation but make him sound even more like prey. Which, let's be honest, he probably was at this point. "It's not supposed to be funny," I admitted, "but it's all we've got." The handle turned slowly. The door creaked open just enough for me to see a hand reaching through the gap. It had too many joints and smelled like copper coins. My stomach did a somersault that made everything spin in my head, but I forced myself to breathe. In, out, in, out. Don't think about Dave's face when he saw what was coming for us. The hand shoved the door open wider, revealing nothing but darkness on the other side, and then I swung. The wrench connected with something solid with a wet thud that made me almost drop it. The thing in the hallway screamed, or at least let out a sound that sounded like metal grating against bone, and stumbled back into the light. It was humanoid, mostly, but stretched too wide, its limbs bent just slightly wrong. Its face was a blur of movement, shifting from one expression to another with every blink. "Run," I said simply. We didn't need to be told twice. I grabbed Mike by the collar and yanked him through the door just as something slammed into the wall where he'd been standing half a second before. We tumbled down a flight of stairs, the rough concrete scraping against my palms until they were raw, and then we were running, legs burning, lungs on fire, the sound of our breathing filling my ears so loud I thought it would drown us out. We didn't stop until we hit the street outside. The air was cold and smelled like wet pavement and exhaust fumes, normal things in a place that wasn't normal anymore. We collapsed behind a dumpster, gasping for breath, hands on knees, staring at each other like strangers. You hit it with a wrench," Mike wheezed. He sounded almost impressed. "It was either the wrench or my dignity." I wiped sweat from my forehead and looked back toward the door we'd just fled through. It stood open in the distance, a black maw in the neon-lit street. "You know, most people would be happy to be alive right now." "Yeah," Mike said. He sounded hollowed out. "I guess so." We sat there for what felt like hours, but was probably maybe only 20 minutes before I realized he hadn't moved since we'd collapsed. His head was tilted back against the brickwork and his eyes were closed, but he wasn't breathing right. Not fast enough, not slow enough, just off. I nudged him with my boot. "Mike?" "Nothing." "Great." I poked him again. "This is great. Just fantastic. One last thing to go wrong." I stood up and looked around. The street was empty, save for the occasional car passing by in the distance like it had a million other places to be. Somewhere far away, a siren wailed. I could have sworn it was right there next to me, but maybe I was just imagining things now too. I reached out and poked him again, harder this time. "Wake up." He slumped sideways onto the pavement. "Perfect," I said. I looked around for a phone or something, anything that wasn't a pebble on the ground. There was nothing. Just me, my battered old shoes, and the guy who had been my friend once upon a time if you counted the last 20 chapters as friends. I leaned against the wall next to him and closed my eyes for just a second. Just 1 second. And when I opened them again, everything was different. The sky had turned a sickly shade of yellow. The streetlights were out, and there, standing at the end of the alleyway holding what looked like an old-fashioned lantern with no flame inside it, was me. But not really. This version of me wore a smile that didn't touch his eyes and held the lantern up to inspect us. "Finally," he said, though his voice sounded exactly right for a man who had spent all night pretending not to care if anyone survived this mess. "I was starting to think you'd never show up." Chapter 23. The lantern in the other me's hand didn't flicker. That was what threw me most. A light source this old, that dirty, should be sputtering. It should have been eating its own wick by now, just like everything else in this dump. Instead, it burned a cold, sterile white, illuminating the cracked pavement and the dust motes that hung suspended in the air like frozen snowflakes of ash. The doppelganger, me, but also not me as its form kept changing between me and Rhonda, mostly tipped the hat back with a gloved finger. It was a hat I'd never seen before, a dark felt thing that looked like it cost more than my entire wardrobe combined. He smiled again. That same smile. The one he wore right up until his face fell off in Chapter 14 of whatever hellscape we were currently inhabiting. "Sit down," the other me said. His voice was like gravel grinding against a tombstone. "We have things to discuss." I looked at him, then back over my shoulder where the archway yawned open behind us. It pulsed with that same rhythmic thumping sound I'd been trying to ignore for days or hours. Time was less of a concept than a suggestion here, a loose thread we were all tugging on just to see what unraveled. "I think you'll find I'm not much for sitting," I said. My voice sounded tinny in the open space, particularly when I know exactly what's waiting inside. "Rhonda won't hurt us if we follow the rules," the doppelganger said. He took a step forward, but his boots didn't click on the pavement. They made no sound at all, just like Dave's footsteps used to sound before he started forgetting his own name and the name of the girl who raised him. "She's waiting for you. Or rather, she's waiting for me." I shifted my weight. The ground beneath me felt spongy, like a mattress that had been left out in the rain too long. It rippled slightly under my shoes before hardening back into concrete. "And who exactly are you supposed to be?" "I'm Rhonda," she said. She gestured vaguely at herself with an open hand, and for a second, I saw it, the glint of something wet and red behind her eyes. A trick of the light? Or maybe just another layer of a lie so deep we'd never dig our way out. Well, I'm a version of me that decided to stop running and start helping. "Helping?" I repeated. The word tasted like copper. "You mean doing whatever you need to do to get what you want, same as the rest of us?" I stepped closer, though every instinct in my body was screaming at me to turn around and run back inside. But where would I go? Back into the dark? Back into the silence that felt like it was pressing against my eardrums, just waiting for a reason to shatter them? No, I needed answers, and I knew exactly who had them, or at least who had them before they became part of the building's real estate portfolio. "You've been here before," I said. It wasn't a question. "All of you. The loops, the deaths, the reboots. You're not just following us anymore. You're hurting us." The doppelganger's smile didn't waver, but her eyes flickered again, and this time it was like watching an old TV struggle through a storm before losing its grip on reality. "You think you're the first ones to figure it out? You think we haven't been here for cycles?" She sighed, a sound that seemed to come from deep inside my own chest. "Look around us. How many times have we died today? 10? 100? And how many times did you actually want to die but couldn't quite manage the willpower?" I didn't answer because she was right. We were in a loop, plain and simple, the kind of psychological trap that would make Freud laugh and then immediately regret ever picking up a psychology degree just to see if it would work out better than her own life. But loops could be exploited. Loops had rules, even if those rules were written on invisible paper by an invisible hand. "Where is she?" I asked finally, keeping my eyes locked on him. "Rhonda." "She's in the walls," she said simply. Then he pointed a thumb over his shoulder toward the archway we'd just come through. "But you already know that, don't you? You've always known. That's why you're here. That's why you followed me out here into the cold, damp night to have this little heart-to-heart." I looked past her, into the darkness of the street beyond. Somewhere far away a siren wailed again, closer than before. We were running low on time. "Tell me what I need to do," I said. The doppelganger tilted her head. "There's nothing left to do but leave. And by leave I mean stay and become part of the place." He paused, letting that hang there for a moment while I processed it. "Or you could trade places with me." I looked at her, really looked at her this time, really dug past the veneer of the perfectly tailored coat and the calm, collected voice. There was something desperate in her stance now, something human. "Why?" I asked. "Because she's lonely," she said simply, "and because you people seem to enjoy suffering more than anyone else I've ever met." She stepped aside. The lantern swung wildly on its chain as he moved, and for a split second I could see her standing in the shadows behind him. Not Rhonda exactly. No, she was bigger now, or at least taller, her body stretched out like taffy pulled across a dark room. She wore an archway around her middle, fused to the brickwork so seamlessly it looked as though she'd been built that way from birth. "She's not just guiding you anymore," the doppelganger said quietly. "She is the place." I felt my stomach turn over, a cold nausea rising up like tide water in a flooded basement. I could feel her eyes on me then, hundreds of them, hundreds of pairs staring out from every crack in the brickwork, watching us with a mixture of longing and hunger that made my skin crawl. "Let me guess," I said. My voice sounded small, even to my own ears. "You can't just walk away." She nodded solemnly. "It's a hard life, being a hero, right?" She turned back toward the archway. "But don't feel bad. We could try again next time. See if we can make it through chapter 23 without dying a horrible death for once." The doppelganger stepped into the darkness and was gone. I stood there for what must have been hours, staring at the empty space where he'd been standing. It was only when I finally exhaled that I realized I was still holding my breath. I turned around slowly, carefully, like a man checking to see if there's anything left in his refrigerator but mustard and old takeout containers. The archway loomed before me now, its surface rippling like the skin of an animal sleeping beneath a sheet. And then she spoke. Her voice wasn't in my ears this time. It was everywhere at once, vibrating through my bones, rattling my teeth like a loose tooth ready to fall out. "You're late," she said. I laughed. I don't know why I did it. It came out as more of a wheeze than anything, but the sound cracked through the night air like a gunshot. "You have no idea how right you are." When we finally made it back to what we knew might be the safest place for the time being, a large building that was built to protect, the room we were going to was unfortunately located 3 floors above the street and smelled faintly of stale popcorn. The others were already there waiting for us. Or rather, Bubba was. He was sitting in a wooden chair that looked like it had been salvaged from a burning building, his boots propped up on the coffee table, whittling at something that might have been a lollipop stick or maybe a toothpick, depending on how desperate you were feeling. "Back so soon?" he asked without looking up. "We were about to send out a search party." "We found what we were looking for," I said as I pulled the door shut behind me with my foot and locked it. It was a habit now, of course, checking locks on windows that hadn't had glass in them for years, but you learned not to think too hard about why. "We found Rhonda." Bubba dropped his whittling knife into his pocket and stood up slowly. His face broke into a grin so wide it looked like it might split his head right open, revealing all the strange, dark machinery that must have been turning underneath. He shuffled over to me and grabbed my shoulders in both hands, shaking me back and forth with a glee that was almost unnerving. "You found her. You actually found her?" he shouted. "I told you. I said if we just followed those birds long enough, they'd lead us right to the nest." "Bubba," I warned. "She's not exactly in one piece." "Details, details." He waved a hand dismissively as he went over to Mike and ruffled the younger man's hair with greasy fingers. The kid winced, but didn't pull away. "So where is she? Is she here? Can we go see her?" "She's in the building," I said slowly, trying to remember if I'd ever heard Bubba use more than 3 syllables at a time without sounding like he was reading off a menu. Well, it's complicated." "Tell me about it," Mike muttered from his corner on the couch. He had a blanket over his legs and was staring intently at his hands as if they were the last thing left in the world that made any sense to him right now. "How do we not know each other by now?" "Bubba knows everything," I said, nodding toward the old man who was currently examining his fingernails with an air of deep concentration. "Bubba probably knew she'd be there. Me?" Bubba laughed and clapped his hands together, a sound like 2 wet boards hitting each other. "Honey, I knew this was going to happen before we even left the house. Hell, I bet Rhonda's still up in that building somewhere knowing full well we were coming all along, probably laughing her ass off about it." I looked back toward the window and felt a chill crawl up my spine that had nothing to do with the cold air seeping through the cracks. Bubba was right, of course. That was the part I didn't like, the idea that none of this was random. The loops, the deaths, the doppelgangers, it was all been leading here for as long as we could remember. Bubba kept looking around, and finally, Rhonda walked into the room. She looked immaculate. Her leg was no longer injured. She looked perfect. Bubba was confused but was so excited that he sat down his cigar and flask and started doing a silly dance with her. She told him everything that had happened and how basically her essence was traded with the doppelganger's essence, and that essentially the doppelganger had voluntarily given up her body so that Rhonda could leave the Ark. The doppelganger's essence is now a part of the Ark instead. Bubba stopped dancing for a few minutes and just stood there but continued hugging her. He was excited nonetheless. To break the awkward silence, I said, turning back to face the others and feeling a strange sense of calm wash over me. "Who wants to go get some dinner? In this multiverse there's this place on 5th that does the best ribs you've ever tasted in your life." "I thought we were out of rib cages," Mike asked, looking confused. "We're not," I said with a shrug, "but I think it's time we tried something new for once." I walked over to the coat rack by the door and pulled down my jacket. It was dirty and stained, but it still smelled like me, like smoke and cheap cologne and whatever else you could fit into a pocket without realizing it until you needed it. The kind of cologne that makes people think you're confident even when they know better. "Come on," I said as I opened the door again, letting in a blast of cold night air and the distant sound of traffic. "Dinner's on me." Please stay tuned for the next installment of Blood Moon Chronicles. Oh, by the way, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. I'll see you soon, my friends.